Hi, and my name is Nick Anello. I teach economics here at HF, and this guided slideshow is based on our presentation for HFU for Families called Start Strong on August 28th in 2019. What we want to do with this presentation is kind of have parents walk away with three things. Leave with several tips for success for their students, understand early intervention ideas and tools that you can use at home, and know the tutoring options and resources available to your child here at HF. So we want to start off with tips for success. So first off, we want parents to measure student success weekly. So that way it doesn't become that, especially if there's a student that's struggling or with certain subjects that, that way students aren't battling with you day by day. Where they might have made a test up and the teacher hasn't put the grade in yet. And so by measuring it weekly, it just kind of makes all right, I want to see progress. Let's be here by the end of next week. So pick a time throughout your week that works for everybody and can be consistent. So maybe that's Sunday night at the dinner table, maybe that's Saturday morning, maybe it's whenever the case is, whenever it's going to work for both parties, both you and your student. No screen time during homework. At the high school age, students should be able to be expected to work for 20 minutes and then take a short break. But in that 20 minutes, they're not flipping back and forth from their phone, they're not on social media, they're just working for that 20 minutes. Then they can take a few minute break and kind of get that screen time. But that way it allows the brain to really focus for that 20 minutes. And then once the 20 minutes is up, then kind of get up, walk around, take a break. Making sure the student stays organized. So that includes the book bag. So maybe once a week when you're talking about grades and progress, you can look through that bag and kind of organize things. There's lots of great tips, and most of them are pretty simple in the sense of, just organizing, getting folders, getting in an accordion file with enough, slots for each subject. After homework is completed, there's always more to do. Look back over your notes, do a little extra practice, email the teacher, whatever the case is. And then don't be afraid to set boundaries and expectations for your child and what you expect out of them. As they grow and gain in more responsibilities, it's okay to set boundaries and expectations for your child that is clear and communicated, but also proper for your own student. Some other tips. Creating a learning space at home is important, so that way there's kind of one place where all the work gets done. So maybe that's the kitchen table, maybe there's a desk somewhere in the house, but just kind of one space that's just kind of free from distractions. It's going to be relatively quiet, and that way the students can kind of get to work. Set, share, and review goals. So maybe it's a GPA, maybe it's an activity or an athletic goal that you want to have your student meet or that the student wants to meet themselves. And just kind of share and review and say, okay, well, this is your goal, and this is what we said we wanted to do, and you're either meeting that goal, exceeding it, or you know what, we need a little more help to kind of help you reach that goal. Putting a family calendar together, there's lots of apps out there, including Google Suite, where you can, kind of share that calendar with everybody. Get involved at HF, both the parent and the student. That way you feel more connected and you have kind of more of that incentive to perform better in school when you feel involved and you meet new friends and all the benefits of being active in the community. Be strategic about work and play balance. So some students get off track because they're either work balance maybe, so maybe they have a job that they're working too many hours at, or they're just kind of spending too much time having fun and not enough time working. So just kind of being strategic about work and play as best as you can. And then another tip can be kind of color coding each subject in class, so that way it's very easy to know that blue is first hour and yellow is second hour and black is third hour and so on. It just makes it easier to kind of keep track of things. Some more tips would be to write homework at school. So it's easy to say okay, I'm going to remember that I have this reading homework for tonight, so I don't need to write it down, I'll just remember because whatever the student might say. But it's always easier to just write it down. There's a lot of kids that use their planners. And if you need a planner, you can contact somebody at school and say, you know what, my student lost one, they didn't get one, or they need another one for home, or whatever the case is, just to kind of write it down at school. So they don't have to worry about keeping all that information in their brain. They can just okay, let me open up to today's page and see, oh, I got to read tonight. Plan the homework out when you get home. That might mean, kind of at 3:15, 3:30 when they get home. Just kind of planning out and saying okay, I think I have about an hour worth of homework. I got a half an hour in science and a half an hour of English maybe. So just kind of plan out and say, you know what, it's 3:30, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. Then I'm going to relax a little bit, let's say for half an hour. So at like 4:15, I'm going to do my science homework. Then I'm going to wait a little bit, and maybe at 6 o'clock I'll do my English homework. But just by planning that out, it kind of makes it easier to keep track of and to do that. And then just kind of checking in on that homework and checking in on, their homework log if you decide that that's the route you want to go. So here's an example of a homework log. So if you've never kind of seen one or you're wondering what one might look like, so you can see on the left side they have the times kind of measured out. And then on Monday, let's say they did some English homework, and then they studied for a health test and studied homework. And while this is good to kind of get started, it'd be much better to kind of go through something a little bit more in-depth about what they did. So if you're reviewing with the student, like, this is a good place to start of just like, okay, let's block out the time. And for most students, it probably goes beyond 8 o'clock, but just to kind of give you a sense of, what we're looking at. Then, when you look at one that's much more in-depth, you can kind of see, like, okay, well, from 5 to 6, From 5 to 6, they read pages 1 to 15 in To Kill a Mockingbird. So then as you're kind of, as the parent, maybe you're trying to help a student out who's really struggling in English, you could ask them, like, okay, so you read the first 15 pages in To Kill a Mockingbird, so tell me what it was about. Tell me what happened. Tell me about the characters. And, as a parent, you can kind of get involved that way of now you can see what exactly they've been doing. Reviewed science notes, highlighted sections you don't understand. From 6 to 7, they made flashcards for health vocabulary terms, and then did the algebra problems that were assigned for homework. So again, it gives you much more of an indication of what they were doing. And then you can start that conversation of, so tell me about what you're learning about in health, or tell me what you're doing with, again, summarizing To Kill a Mockingbird. And so this gives you a much better picture of what your student is doing and much more to kind of get involved with, the topics your student is going through. On the HF website, if you click on the Parenting tab, you'll find a link to our tutoring calendar. We do offer free tutoring 7 days a week, including on Saturdays and Sundays. Those do change, and so there's no reason to put it on this slideshow if this is going to be available for the next 10 years or so. But you can check the tutoring website. If you can't find anything, always call the school switchboard and say, hey, I'm looking for the tutoring calendar. Where can I find that? And they can get you to where you need to go. Always have students ask the teacher for tutoring options first, because the teacher knows your child best and knows what they need to work on. So if you can, work out a time that works for both your student and the teacher, and go with that tutoring option first, because, again, your teacher is going to have a better prescription of how to fix your students' issues in class or what they're lacking or skills, better than just going to tutoring. But that tutoring 7 days a week is also very powerful, and that's staffed by HF people to kind of tutor students. So make sure that you plan on attending things like back to school night and attending parent-teacher conferences, which this year is Thursday, November 7th, but if you're in 2020 or sometime in the future, it may not be that same date. But make sure you attend parent-teacher conferences, but don't wait until parent-teacher conference to contact your teachers. If you're noticing something about your student in a class, go ahead and don't wait until that November 7th day and say, well, I'll just see them then. Don't be afraid to send out an email to the teacher or teachers, email the counselor, call somebody, call the counselor, leave a voicemail for the teacher to call you back, so that way you can get a better picture of how to help your student and what they need and what they're lacking, and so you can, kind of support them from home, and so, just to kind of keep in contact. So don't be afraid to contact before those parent-teacher conferences. We try to give a handout every year about the parent-teacher conference questions, but if you want to pause this and just kind of look through the questions and see maybe, some more in-depth questions about your child in each class, if you're curious of like, I don't really know what to ask the teachers when I go to parent-teacher conference, and just kind of like, how's he doing or how's she doing? This could be some more in-depth ways on bringing up conversations at parent-teacher conferences. So here's just a short list. Like I said, you can pause and go through and maybe write some things down that you'd like to ask your teacher, or ask your students' teachers when parent-teacher conference comes up, or just in that phone call or email as well. So kind of shifting gears into some behavioral norms and procedures, what we always ask students is to just simply be present. I mean, like at the bare minimum, to be here and be ready. And that way that will help them boost to the next level, which would be to perform better as well. But to be present both physically kind of in the classroom, but also cognitively in terms of engaging with the lessons. So here's just some information about what we do with attendance. Again, you can pause this and go through it in more detail. The idea just being that, just to give you some ideas of what the attendance office does and what the contracts are, and just kind of what the expectations are of your student attendance wise. Same thing here with tardy tips in terms of what is expected and what the consequences are of tardies. We give enough time for students to get to class, whether that's south to south, south to north, north to south, or north to north. And so just so that you have the information about tardies and what that means when you get that notification. Something that started new last year in 2018-19 was that we are requiring students to wear IDs around the building. So this is what we're expecting of students, just so you kind of know for your own, if an issue arises, you know what we're expecting. What we transfer to students, what we tell them all the time is they must wear their ID cards during school hours. It must be worn around their necks on a school-appropriate lanyard and outside of clothing to ensure visibility. So that means even like in the winter, we want it outside the coat, so that way it's very easy to identify who should be in the building and who shouldn't. Staff are also wearing IDs, and any visitors to the building will have little stickers on as well that must be shown on the outside of their clothing, so that way we know that the people who are supposed to be here are here. If a student forgets to wear his or her ID, or they forget it, their second and seventh period teacher will give them a temporary ID. If they use the couple temporary IDs we give them kind of for free, there may then be a $1 charge as well for us kind of processing those IDs, and just to kind of give that incentive for students to keep track of and wear their IDs around the building at all times. So in terms of behavioral resolution, so if there's a conflict that arises, we try to de-escalate the situation, and they may be referred to the dean's office. And what HF kind of offers in terms of trying to mediate said conflict. Now, obviously, we want to try to de-escalate the conflict before it escalates. But so if a student wants to come to a dean, some trusted adult in the building, and say like, "Hey, I'm not getting along with this person. I need some help dealing with this." We have a bunch of options that can help. So it can be things like peer mediation, where we have students who are trained in mediating to just kind of sit down and talk with students. A one-to-one dean's mediation, so without sort of consequence if nothing has happened yet, then the dean can kind of intervene and just try to, wrap their hands around the situation and try to, kind of de-escalate the situation before it gets worse. Could be student conferences, it could be a peace room service, it could be formal conferences with parents, students, guidance counselors, it could be, talking to a social worker, talking to a counselor, talking to a dean, something like that. But just as long as, hopefully students start to realize that I need to talk to somebody before something worse happens. So that way we can kind of stave it off before it gets any worse, and then students may be asked to miss school time for certain things. But just so you know what we're kind of offering in terms of conflict resolution should something like this arise. So here are just some tips from the dean's office in terms of what parents can do. Just kind of reminding them about passing periods as you get those alerts on your email from Tardies that, hey, you got to get to that third-hour class faster. What needs to be done, and kind of setting a plan. Making sure they have their IDs and stuff and their, all that before they leave for the day. And encourage students to get to know the adults in the building. So studies show that students who have more than one trusted adult in the school building have a greater likelihood for future success. So maybe it's an athletic coach, maybe it's an activity sponsor, maybe it's their fifth-hour teacher, maybe it's a dean, maybe it's a counselor, like somebody, so that way if something's going wrong, your student feels confident saying, I'm really struggling in my fourth hour because is there any help that I can get? What should I do? And then that way the student can sit down with the trusted adult and really kind of plan out like, okay, so what can we do to help you out? And that'll be really big for the students to kind of go through. Next up in our last section is social emotional needs of starting strong. So SEL stands for social emotional learning. And so what the benefits are of just kind of having students realize what their social emotional well-being is about is improvement in classroom behavior when they kind of identify what's going on and the triggers and working to mitigate those. Increase in self-confidence as they become more aware of their emotional needs. 11% increase in scores on standardized tests. Social and emotional skills, which everybody needs, for the working world. Better attitudes about school. More positive interactions with others. Increase in empathy. towards other students. It helps to improve self-regulation of moods and habits and behavior. And so what our programs do is try to reduce aggressive behavior, reduce emotional distress, be able to work through problems, and to reduce impulsive behaviors that might lead to actions with consequences. So what parents can do is play a role in raising a self-aware, respectful child who knows how to manage his or her emotions, make responsible decisions, and resolve conflicts nonviolently. So at home, things that you can do to kind of model this would be to be a good listener. So, when your child is telling you about school or telling you about a friend group or telling you about a movie or whatever the case is, that you're just listening. So the student knows that, that's part of being in a caring relationship, is being a good listener. Model the behavior that you seek as best that you can. Nurture your child's self-esteem. Everybody wants to feel good about themselves, and so being at home should be one of those places where the child feels safe and they feel valued and they feel respected. Respect differences between what's going on now in the world and maybe when we grew up. Take advantage of support services. So if your child needs some help, there's a service here at HF, or we can find one that will help support your student socially and emotionally and academically. And keep an open communication with our school district. So, talking to the counselor, telling the deans when something is wrong, talking to the social worker, talking to a psychologist. So just keeping that line of communication open so that way we know as much about your child and we can help support them in what ways they may need it. So this concludes our Start Strong presentation. I wish you and your child or children a happy and healthy year. And if you have any questions, reach out to somebody here at HF, be it a counselor, a dean, the students' teachers, whoever you need to get in contact with. Don't be afraid to just pick up that phone or send that email off and ask those questions that may help support your child. So have a great year, and thank you for listening.